Okay, good morning all of you. I hope everyone have joined. So let us start today's session. So we were discussing about some of the implicit objects in the previous class. We are left over with three implicit objects. We have already discussed six implicit objects in different contexts. So first we have seen while reading the form parameters and generating response, we have seen some of the implicit objects, right? So let us list out those implicit objects now first. So first one is, we have seen request, then second one response, next third is out, we have seen out, then fourth, what is the fourth one, we have seen session. What else? Any other objects that we have seen earlier? Request, response, out, session, then
Exception.
yes, exception, application, then page, then config, the last one is page context. Right, so out of this we have used the first request, response, out, session, these four implicit objects. We have used them in our previous application when we have created a simple registration and login page application. We have used these four implicit objects, and then later in the last class I have shown you exception and config, right? So we are left over with the remaining three, that is application, page and page context, that is 6th, 7th and 9th. But anyhow, we will not have much to discuss about page here, because I told you in the previous class itself, page in object is an object of type which class? Object class. So you know Java provides us with a class called object with O capital, which is a super class for all the Java classes, right? So if you want to use any of the methods which are part of that class, which we normally use in our Java programs, then JSP provides us with a mechanism with an implicit object called page object. So whatever methods you can call, you will be calling in your normal Java programs using that object class. You can call all those methods using page object here. So instead of page implicit object, you can also use this keyword. So we'll not see any program for demonstrating this page implicit object. So we'll see today a program for implementing application and then page context. So if you observe all these 9 implicit objects, all the 9 implicit objects, except the last one, the page context, remaining all implicit objects have a single word name, right? A request is a single word, response is a single word, out is a single word, session is a single word, exception is a single word, application is a single word, page is also a single word, and config is also a single word. But coming to page context, it has multiple words. So you know the naming convention in Java, when there are multiple words in an object name or variable name, what we do is we follow a convention. The first word will be in small letters, the remaining words will begin with a capital letter. So as such, the second word, context C, begins with a capital letter, right? So let me tell you about what is the purpose of this application, and then what is the purpose of page context. So in the previous pro class we have seen how to use exception and how to use config objects, implicit objects, right? So what is the purpose of config implicit object? So you have a interface called servlet config interface, which we didn't cover it in the servlets, but I covered it in the last class. So because whenever you come across that purpose and usage of that entity, then if you discuss on the spot, then you'll understand better. So that's the reason why we discussed in the last class. So now, what is the purpose of config? Config is used to read initialization parameters for a servlet. You can read the initialization parameters of a servlet. So instead of storing these initialization parameters and passing them to your servlet program and storing them in your servlet program, which is a tedious task, and whenever you want to make change or pass new parameters, what will happen is you have to recompile the servlet program and run the program again. So that is a tedious task. So to avoid that, what we do is we store the initialization parameters for every servlet in Web Dot Xml file, which is called as the deployment descriptor, right? So you can read that contents of that initialization parameter, which are mentioned in between the init param tag, which is part of the servlet tag, right? So what, how and where you can access these initialization parameters from web.xml file means you can access only in one servlet class. You cannot access in all the servlet class. So you know that very well. A servlet application contains many servlet classes, not just one single class, right? So if you store any servlet initialization parameters using the init param tag in your web.xml file, then you can access that parameters and their values only in that particular servlet. So that means this init param tag is limited only for one servlet. But what if you want to use some parameters or store some parameters in web.xml file and make them available for the entire application? That means any servlet class can access these parameters and their values. So that is not possible with the init param tag. So what we can do is, in a web.xml file, instead of using init param tag, we have to use context param tag, right? So we discussed this in the last class. So let me show you that context param tag, how to use it in our JSP application now. So I've created sorry, this is not the one. So this is a page context. Let me create that web.xml file here. So I have to open this notepad in an administrator mode. So I'm saving it as web.xml file, where you are supposed to save it inside web.inf folder. So I'm storing it here. So now, actually this web.xml file is for related to config. That means you can have init param tag here. But now we don't want to use this init param tag. Instead of that, we have to use context param tag. So let me remove this one. So if you observe, where is that init param tag used? Inside the servlet tag. So in your web application, you can create as many servlet tags as you want in the web.xml file, depending on the number of servlet classes you define in your application, right? So if there are, say for example, 10 servlet classes defined in your application, then you will be creating 10 different servlet tags under the root tag web app, right? But here in this case we have only one servlet, so that's why we have defined only one servlet tag here. And if you observe the init param tag, it is made a child tag for servlet tag. So uh, uh, this will convey us some information. What is that information? Is this initialization parameter is limited only to this particular servlet. And what is that servlet? The name of the servlet is config, right? And we are using it in welcome.jsp file. So here we have used a new tag called JSP file, JSP hyphen file, because we are using this context in a JSP application, not in a servlet application. So that's why we need to create, instead of servlet class, we have to create JSP hyphen file tag. For normal servlet application, we have been creating servlet hyphen class, right? And here we'll be giving the name of the servlet class. But instead here, instead of class, we need to use JSP and hyphen file tag. So in that, you have to specify the name of the JSP page that you want to send the request to, right? So that name you have to specify here, and before that you need to use the URL pattern also, that is the forward slash. It is mandatory here also. Anyhow, you will be giving the same here in the servlet mapping tag under URL pattern tag here, but here also it is mandatory, you need to specify it here, right? So then you also have a servlet mapping tag for every servlet, right? So everything is common as you do it in a servlet application, but only difference is, instead of having a servlet class tag, you will have a JSP file tag, right? So in the servlet mapping tag, as usual, you have servlet name and URL pattern tags. So what does this tell you? What is this init parameter telling you? It is saying that this parameter dname and its value is com.mysql.jdbc driver. This is only limited for accessing in the servlet called config servlet or in the welcome.jsp file, right? This is limited to only one servlet. What if you want to make the parameters available for all the servlets in your application? Then you have to remove this init param tag. Instead of this init param tag, you need to use context param tag. Okay, and where to use this, where to create this? After servlet mapping tag or in between also you can do that. So instead of init param, you make it as context param tag. So let me change this name. Instead of init, I'll make it context. Okay, so now you have context param tag. Okay, so you can access these values from your JSP application through this web.xml file using which object? Using which object?
Context.
Not context, using application. Application specifies that you can use these parameters inside the entire application. Okay, that's the reason. Sorry, I was misleaded. So you have web apps. application. So this is our file, we have it available. For page context, you don't require this web.xml file. We require for config and application. So let me close this. So I'll open this index.html file. So this is our HTML file from where we'll be sending the request. So it has a form, HTML form, which contains a text field and a submit button. So the text field name attribute value is given as uname, and submit button is go button. So whenever you click on the go button, the form will be submitted to a page called welcome. Okay, so this is my welcome.jsp file. So what is this welcome.jsp file doing? It is simply displaying a message using out.print welcome concatenated by the value that is retrieved from the HTML form, that is the name, right? So the text field name is mentioned as what? Uname, right? So name attribute value here is mentioned as uname. So using this as a parameter to the get parameter method, I am retrieving the text field content and concatenating with welcome message, right? So what will be the output when you submit the form? It will display welcome, and whatever name you entered in the text field, that name will be displayed. And after that, because you are concatenating with a break tag, the cursor goes to the next line, and in the next line what we are doing is, see, look at the object. I'm calling get init parameter method. So we have used the same get init parameter method in the previous program, that is to access init parameter, initialization parameter, right? So the same method can be used here also. Even though these are context parameters, you can use the same get init parameter method to obtain the value of a particular parameter, right? So if you want to use this method, you need to know what are the parameters listed in the web.xml file first, then only you can access them. So if you specify a different name which is not there in web.xml file, you will not get the parameter value, right? So look at the object name I'm using application. So what is this? It is an implicit JSP object. So you can use that application object and call the get init parameter method. Fine. So this application object is an object of which interface? Config is an object of servlet config interface in javax.servlet package. Similarly, application is also an object of type which interface? It is an object of type servlet context. Okay, so using that object, even the servlet context interface also provides us with get init parameter method, just like servlet config provides. So you can call this get init parameter method and mention the parameter name and retrieve the value and store it in the form of a string in a variable called driver. Then using another out.print, I'm displaying driver name is concatenated with the value of the driver. So if you run this application, so this is my application. So here I'll give my name. So look at the output. Welcome Tarakeshwar. Then the driver name is com.mysql.jdbc.driver. Okay. Then if you you must have noticed this form. The action attribute value is mentioned as welcome, right? Why we mentioned here as welcome? Can anyone guess? Why did we mention as welcome there? because in the web.xml file we have mentioned, instead of servlet class we have mentioned JSP file, and here we have mentioned the URL pattern for sending the request to this welcome.jsp file, right? So that's why instead of giving here in the HTML file the action attribute value as welcome.jsp file, what I am doing is I am giving it as only welcome. If you are not using that web.xml file, then you have to give welcome.jsp. But because you are using a web.xml file and reading parameters from that web.xml file, what we need to do, whatever URL pattern you have given there for the JSP file, that URL pattern you have to specify here. You need not specify the extension of the file name, right? So your file name may be different, but here the URL pattern must be exactly what you have given in the web.xml file. So if instead of giving welcome.jsp URL pattern as welcome here, I can give something else. I can give hello. If you are giving hello here, then here also you need to give hello here. So you know the same concept we worked with servlets also, right? Fine. So now let us see the web.xml file. In the servlet tag, I didn't use the init parameter tag. So in the servlet mapping tag, we have used servlet name and URL pattern. So look at the new tag that we used. Instead of init param, we have used context param, right? So the context param has two subtags, just like init param has the same tags. You can use them in context param tag also, right? So one is param name, the second one is param value. So what is the name of the param? D name. And what is its value? com.mysql.jdbc.driver, right? So here we have used only one parameter. If you want to use multiple parameters, then you define this context param tag multiple times and give different names. Then instead of using only get init param tag, get init parameter method in the welcome.jsp file, you can also use a method called get init parameter names. So what is this method going to do is, it is going to return all the parameter names, and you can store them in a string array, and later you can use them using get init parameter method. You can pass each of the name, and then you retrieve their value and store in the form of a string. So what is the advantage with that get init parameter names method is, if you don't know what are the parameter names that you created in web.xml file, then what you can do is you can call get init parameter names method, which will return an array of all the list of names in the form of a string array. Okay, so you store each of those parameter names in a string array of objects, and then retrieve each one by using a for loop or something, and pass them as parameter to get init parameter method. So what is the method you need to use to retrieve all the names of parameters in web.xml file? The name of the method is, you have to use it as application dot get parameter names. So we have seen this method even in HTTP request object also while dealing with servlets. So it doesn't have any parameters, but what is this going to return? It is going to return an array of string object. So what you need to have is string, say some names is equal to, like this you can do. Okay, so then using some index names of 0, names of 1, so on, you can use them as parameter name here, put it in a for loop, and you can extract the values, right? So anyhow, we are not going to deal with that. Just for your information, in our application we are creating only one context parameter, so we are reading directly using the name of the parameter mentioned in the get init parameter method. So there is another method called this is get init parameter names. Okay, fine. So now that you understood this one, let us move on to the next object. What is the next object? We need to see page context object, right? So we'll see it in the next video.